The Wargame Annihilation mod is a modern conflict mod for Wargame Red Dragon. There's currently two nations available, United States and the Soviet Russian Federation. They are planning to add more nations in the future. As you might imagine with a modern conflict mod, there's a lot of modern weapons, as well as some old-timey favourites which have been updated. There's also some pretty crazy weaponry available. Unfortunately, due to engine limitations, not a lot of these new units have new unit models, so you're just gonna have to use your imagination a little bit. Vehicles and even FOBs can be transported by helicopter. CVs are also a little bit more stealthier, and all decks get an extra availability slot for logistics. For the infantry, there's a lot of very interesting specialized troops, such as 5-man special forces teams, which can sneak behind enemy lines pretty effectively and spot all the bloody artillery. It's also just more varied weapon loadout between all the infantry. As well, there's more support weaponry, such as 50 cal machine guns. They've also added ATGM, such as the Javelin, and yes, the Javelin does hit the top armor. It's pretty nasty. There's also some pretty powerful APCs and IFVs which are available, and also the V-22 Osprey. It goes over 500 kilometers an hour. There's some pretty heavy-duty anti-aircraft weaponry available, such as the S-400 and more modernized versions of the Patriot. Yes, that range is accurate. Some artillery guns, such as the Paladin, do have a second ammunition type which is meant to represent GPS shells, and they're also very accurate at long range, great for counter-batterying. They also added cluster munitions with high explosives, and in general the artillery is pretty deadly. But, even with this in mind, it's actually somewhat balanced by the fact they're pretty expensive, and also they use up a lot of munitions. Tanks have been buffed quite a bit. They all have 15 HP, they have access to smoke launchers, and they're generally cheap considering the amount of firepower you're getting. There's also the T-14 Armata, and some tanks do have a small ECM rating to simulate APS systems. Recon is just as important as ever, but there's also drones which are now available. You got cheaper spam runs, but you also got some more expensive high-tech runs. And yes, they did actually add an AC-130. Vehicles are a bit more useful compared to vanilla. The Americans have a lot of cheap ATGM carriers, and the Russians do have that as well, but they have some pretty high-tech weaponry as well. Helicopters, attack runs it is, are deadly but expensive. Recon helicopters have been moved over to the regular helicopter tab. The helicopter tab is now generally more expensive in terms of availability, but then you also get helicopters which are stealth, such as the Dark Hawk, or attack helicopters which also have anti-aircraft missiles which are also anti-tank missiles. And also some helicopters have an ECM rating now. Airplanes is where things start to get a little bit nuts. They added AROX planes, such as the E-3G Century, with jamming pods. These jamming pods will spot and target radar anti-air, and actually force the unit to panic. It does morale damage to simulate jamming the enemy. They also added decoy missiles, such as the ADM-160 Maud, which you can use to throw at the enemy anti-aircraft defense to force them to release a bunch of ammunition. Actually reminds me quite a bit of Ruse. They also added cruise missile capable aircraft, such as the Tu-95. Yes, the bomb range is 16 kilometers. Yes, it comes out of spawn and immediately shoots its load and falls back to base. Yes, it's pretty nuts, but it does have a very long reload time. In general, aircraft loadouts, especially air to ground, is pretty damn nasty. They are very deadly, but also pretty expensive. They also added this aircraft called the F-35. I heard War Chat talking about it, so they might be happy to see it in game. Overall, this is a very well done mod for Wargame Red Dragon. There's definitely been a lot of care and attention put into the actual mechanics, and also just the amount of bloody units which have been added into the game. Yes, they don't have the actual unit models for this stuff, but they've done a pretty good job with unit cards. I quite like them a lot. Balance of the mod is a little bit racky, just due to the fact that everything is much more expensive. I highly recommend you play on higher incomes. And also with everything being such, well, long-range deadly weapon systems, it also benefits to play on slightly larger maps than before. As with the mods, the game is much more mobile and also just much more deadly, so you definitely do need some space to maneuver around, Otherwise, it just turns into a choke point hell. AI is not exactly the smartest compared to vanilla, so I do recommend trying to play with actual people. Their Discord do actually organise matches, and the team games in this mod are much more fun. I'd say this mod is better balanced for team games compared to 1v1s. I also do recommend trying out the specialised decks a bit more in this mod, as they're definitely more flavourful compared to vanilla, and there's some pretty interesting restrictions with them. If you want to try out the mod, you can download it from their Discord, the link is in the description below. It's very easy to set up and play, there's not a whole lot of tinkering you have to do to get this working. But yeah, if you do have any classified documentation on the T14 Armata, please